In the patient population that I serve at UCLA, I would say that the lion's share of patients would identify some flavor of spiritual but not religious. That's pretty common in the way that Americans tend to identify themselves spiritually these days. It's consistent. It's an ambiguous expression. It doesn't mean the same thing to everyone. So I will often ask a patient, what do you mean by that spiritual? Or they'll ask me. For myself, I'd have to go back to the Latin root of the word, spiritus, which only means breath. So what is it that gives breath to your life? What is it that gives it meaning? What is it that makes you want to get up and face another day? Now, for some, that might mean a deep connection to a religious community or practice or tradition. For some, it might mean a more personal relationship to a higher power. For some, it might mean their family or their work or their dog or surfing the perfect wave. For some, it might mean the place where they feel that connection to a higher power, maybe a seashore or mountains or desert or the Thanksgiving dinner table. Whatever it is, a diagnosis of cancer can really mess with all of that because what used to feel meaningful yesterday, today feels meaningless, or I don't have access to it in quite the same way. So perhaps I need to find a new sense of meaning, or at least a new pathway to connect to the old one. Permit me this digression, if you will. In September of 1985, my husband Scott and I took a trip to France. We spent an entire day driving through Normandy, touring the D-Day beaches, which was territory that my own father had bombed some 40 years earlier from his B-17, paving the way for the D-Day invasions to follow. At the end of the day, we made our way to Mont Saint-Michel off the north coast of Brittany, and we arrived just as the sun was dipping into the sea behind the silhouetted spire of the mount. I was transfixed by the mystical beauty of this improbable medieval gem and by these swirling tides that looked as if the gods were pouring water over the earth from some unseen pitcher. We bedded down for the night at Mare Poulard and made a reservation for an English-speaking tour of the abbey at the pinnacle of the mount for the next morning. The tour guide spoke with such a thick French accent that I could only understand maybe every third or fifth word of whatever she was saying, but she did use an expression I deciphered quite easily, the Gothic heart. Actually, it sounded more like the Gothic heart. The first time she said it, I turned around and poked Scott in utter delight. Ooh, the Gothic heart, I love that. What do you suppose that's about? I think I have one. I've always felt this affinity for the Middle Ages and for monastic life in particular. Though she went on to use the expression several more times, she never came back around to any explanation that I could understand anyway. Until about 45 minutes into the tour, I realized she wasn't saying Gothic heart at all. She was saying Gothic art. Those of you old enough to remember Gilda Radner's character, Emily Latella, on Saturday Night Live, I had my own little Emily Latella moment. Never mind. Still, I was crestfallen. I loved the idea of the Gothic heart, so much so that it still sticks with me some 37 years later, but all in my imagination. My point being, meaning making is a creative endeavor. It is individual, it is personal, it is ever evolving. Now, we do, in part, make meaning communally as a society, and sometimes those communal meanings can seem fixed, solid, unchanging. A shiny new BMW means financial wealth. Financial wealth means success in life. A long marriage means you must be happy. As the wave of life washes over us, we come to understand how untrue those assumptions just might be. But still, it is our creative choice whether we will align with the communal meaning or with something else altogether. The universe of cancer has a whole world of communal meaning attached to it, most of it couched in the language of war, struggle, and battle. The language is so ubiquitous we may not even be attuned to it anymore, but we'll often hear, oh, she's fighting breast cancer. We'll read an obituary, he lost his fight with lung cancer. Does it really need to be seen through that lens? Many of the patients I see reject such imagery of war, struggle, and battle. They choose to reject that imagery. Clara, young woman, early 20s, undergoing a stem cell transplant for leukemia, her mother by her side every step of the way. Clara and her mother were devout Christians. Over the years, I'm used to hearing the perspective through which many Christians might view their health crises, but Clara and her mother had a unique perspective. Her mom said, Michael, this cancer is a part of my daughter. Therefore, it's a part of God. So I have to love it as I love my daughter, as I love God. And I believe through loving it, she will be healed. Claudia, a deeply reflective woman, maybe in her 50s, breast cancer patient, said, Michael, I can't afford to be at war with my own body anymore. What if my body's doing the best it can? I want to love my body. I want to love it so well that that cancer just releases and goes back to wherever it came from. In a similar vein, Rhonda saw her cancer as a kind of dance, a dance with a tiger. Michael, I'm just waltzing that tiger back into its cage. Still, others do resonate with that imagery of war and battle. Sergio, a young testicular cancer patient in his 20s, used to envision his chemo treatments as a kind of video game, a war to be won. The thing about seeing cancer through that lens of war, struggle, and battle is that it promotes a black and white, dualistic, either or kind of thinking with language like win and lose, success and failure. After all, what does success with cancer look like? Well, the obvious answer is cure, right? Or at least complete remission. But if I've supposedly been cured of cancer, but I'm living in mortal fear of it returning, or I'm grieving so terribly what I've lost along the way, who won the war? We had a discussion about this very topic in the Circle of Reflection. It's a spiritual reflection group I facilitate at the Simms Mann Center. This was a while back. We were talking about what does success with cancer look like? And we did not have consensus in the group. For some, success meant getting my old life back, whatever that meant to them. For some, it meant living long enough to see a beloved child or grandchild graduate or get married or even be born. For some, it meant finishing the book I've been writing or growing spiritually into deeper kind of acceptance and unity with life. For some, it meant being an inspiration to others. The thing about success and failure, sometimes it can be hard to tell which is which. What if it isn't so much about success and failure? What if cancer just is, like a wave in the ocean, slowly moving towards shore, unstoppable, a wave that has the power to cause harm, to be sure. But surfers pray for such waves, for those sublime thrills of the peaks and valleys of the ride, and even risking wiping out altogether. From what I've observed of those riding the cancer wave, the opportunity also exists, maybe even the invitation for profound spiritual growth. We might come to a whole new understanding of definitions for words like success and heal. We might come to a whole new understanding of what it means to be a human being, what it means to love and be loved. Or we might not. But the wave is real, and it will take us on a journey whether we would go along willingly or not. And before you say, oh, come on, Michael, nobody goes on this ride willingly. I did have a patient once, Dinesh, raised in India, steeped in Eastern culture and religion, who, when diagnosed with gastric cancer, greeted it with this amazing kind of equanimity. Okay, Michael, now I get to experience what this is like. We do have a choice as to how we will ride that wave. And while the wave is real, it is also a ever-shifting, ever-changing environment, and our capacity to ride it must be adaptable to those shifts and turns. Like taking any trip at all, it is a skilled traveler who can let go of yesterday's reality, expectations, and hopes, and embrace today's reality, expectations, and hopes. Maybe this trip started off to be our ideal honeymoon that we've been saving for forever to the Bahamas. But now, with the advent of this hurricane in the forecast, it's about getting home safe and sound. And like any skill, there is a steep learning curve on this wave because it can rock us to our very core of everything we've ever thought to be true and real. Ultimately, I would say how we choose to ride this wave is a matter of faith. Now, it's a faith that might be described in religious or spiritual terms, or a faith that is completely secular in nature, but it's faith nevertheless. In religious terms, that faith might be that God will heal me, I'll have a miraculous healing. In more secular terms, that faith might be in one's doctor, or the latest drug protocol, this drug trial, or organic food. One article of faith that seems to transcend the religious secular spectrum is the idea that things happen for a reason. Maybe everything happens for a reason. I hear that article of faith expressed in religious language, in spiritual language, and in secular language, but the concept is the same. In religious language, that reason might be the Lord's testing me, testing my faith, or maybe, God forbid, punishing me. In more spiritual, less religious language, that reason might be this was a wake-up call. It's a reminder not to sweat the small stuff, to really pay attention to what matters. In completely secular language, that reason might be I've lived an unhealthy lifestyle. I need to clean up my act, eat better, exercise. For some, the faith is so foundational, I simply believe everything happens for a reason. Michael, we can't know what it is, and I hope someday to find out the answer. Every one of those statements of faith has the power to soothe and calm, but it also has the power to intensify our suffering. When it's because of something I did or didn't do that I have this cancer. I wasn't positive enough. I wasn't prayerful enough. I must have prayed the wrong thing. And it can often mean a spiritual crisis. I don't know what's true anymore. So I suppose a good place to start is what's my relationship to spiritual crisis? Can it be okay for that first wave or 2 or 10 to wash over me, hold me underwater, leaving me gasping for air with a mouthful of sand and water, spitting and sputtering, flailing about, trying to get my bearings in this new reality? I do meet many patients who, when I introduce myself as the chaplain, will comment, "Oh, I have a very strong faith. I'm just fine. Thank you very much, Michael." And I know they think they're being perfectly clear in saying such a thing, but I don't know what they mean by that. Faith in what? In God? In their own sense of higher power? In their own inner wisdom? What? And if it is a faith in God, what does that faith tell them? That they'll be cured? Or that they're not alone? Or that they have the strength it takes to make this journey? Every one of those statements of faith will ride the wave in a different way. What happens when it's not really up to the rigors of this particular wave? I met Ruth only once, the first day of chemotherapy, newly diagnosed with breast cancer. Ruth was a devout evangelical Christian. Michael, the Lord is not testing me with this cancer. I'm testing the Lord because I'm going to go through cancer and I'm going to go through chemotherapy and I'm not going to lose my hair. Too many people are counting on me. I can't afford for anybody to know I'm sick. Well, this raised a particular red flag for me. What would happen when Ruth did lose her hair? What kind of spiritual crisis might that be? So I gently tried to tease apart her theology to see if there was a bedrock of belief there that could include the possibility that she loses her hair. Sadly, she was unwilling to have that conversation. Now, as I say, I only met her once. I don't know what happened when she did lose her hair, if it was, in fact, a spiritual crisis. But if it had been, it would be no different than anyone else putting all of their faith in the latest drug trial, in vitamin D, or in their organic diet, and discovering that their cancer had not been arrested, but had, in fact, spread. When I met Karen, she told me, "Michael, I don't know what I did to deserve kidney cancer." Karen, what could you have possibly done to deserve kidney cancer? What, did you mow down 17 kids with an AK-47 in a McDonald's somewhere? What? No, she said, but it must be something. And it was as if that statement brought her a backwards kind of comfort because it still promoted the idea that she was in charge. She was responsible. She screwed up, and that's why she has cancer, but hey, she was still in charge. To consider the possibility that the cancer just happened, that it was out of her control, that she was powerless over it, unthinkable, unwilling to have that conversation. Coming face to face with that powerlessness, I would say, is the core spiritual challenge that confronts everyone on the cancer journey. Now, I certainly don't mean to imply that we're powerless over how we choose to ride the wave or the meaning that we find there. But what if we're powerless over the existence of the wave itself? Ask anyone who's been diagnosed with lung cancer, who has a loved one diagnosed with lung cancer. What's the first question anyone asks? Oh, was she a smoker? Did you smoke? I would suggest it's our own inability to face our powerlessness that would inspire such a grotesquely insensitive question. The implication being, oh, you were a smoker? Too bad, shouldn't have done that. I don't smoke, therefore I'm safe. What happens when our faith meets its limitation, when our certainty meets doubt? At that particular intersection, many folks get angry. They get angry at God, they get angry at their doctor, they get angry at themselves. For what? For not living a healthier lifestyle, for not going to the doctor sooner, for not getting a second opinion. One woman absolutely broke my heart when she said, Michael, I don't think I've lived a good enough life to get God's attention. I don't think I deserve a miracle. Carolyn had no trouble at all articulating her particular spiritual crisis. If anything, she was thrilled to have someone listen, to be a witness. When we met, she told me that 6 months earlier, her 36-year-old daughter had been killed in a car accident, leaving behind her 2 pre-teenage children to be raised by her substance-abusing former son-in-law. And now she finds out that her only other child, her 39-year-old son, has been diagnosed with colon cancer with metastasis to the liver. It was too much. Michael, it's not like I don't know about loss. My mother died when I was 9, my brother when I was 15. I've worked in healthcare. I know about loss, but this is too much. Carolyn had always taken a lot of comfort in her Protestant faith and in her prayer life. But now she says, Michael, I can't pray anymore and don't even want to. And when friends tell me they'll pray for me, a part of me wants to say, don't even bother. Isn't that terrible? We looked at what her statements really revealed about her beliefs, about her theology, but through the lens of relationship. Did this sort of standoff with God, this idea that I can't talk to you right now, I've just got to go walk around the block or something, did this mean that she wasn't in relationship to God? I would suggest just the opposite. We only fight with those we care about. Otherwise, we would be indifferent. It wouldn't matter. We fight because we want to understand, because we want so desperately to be understood ourselves. Would you just get it? What if her walk around the block were even its own kind of prayer? Yeah, sometimes those waves can hold us underwater and leave us gasping. But I find more often than not, we do find a way to float. Rita was so eager for someone to blame for her cancer. Michael, I just want to blame somebody. I wish I could blame my husband. That's what I really wish. And I'm so angry. I'm angry at the doctor who misdiagnosed this 2 years. I'm angry at myself for not going to another doctor sooner. I'm angry at myself for being angry. I just want to know why. Why did this happen? I hear this almost universally from patients at some point along the way. Why? I will often reply, if I could give you a sealed envelope right now with a card inside, with your name on the outside, and on that card is the reason you have cancer. Would you open the envelope? And if you did, do you suppose you would suffer less or suffer more? To find out it's because of all those Big Macs you ate in high school. You spent too much time in the sun. It's because you smoked. It's because you drank. It's your genetic bad luck. It's because of some sin you committed in an earlier life. It's karma. What to do with that irredeemable regret and guilt? What if it's nobody's fault? What if cancer just is? What if that wave is impersonal? From what I observe, coming to a new relationship with that powerlessness can open a whole new window to new dimensions of peace, of mind and heart. Yes, that powerlessness might be the source of our greatest spiritual distress. At first, it can also open a doorway to whole other pathways, dimensions of maybe even wisdom. Another word for that powerlessness might be vulnerability. And there is so much in our culture that would tell us to avoid vulnerability at all costs. Wear your seatbelt, lock your door, get an alarm, don't drive in that part of town at night, don't ask for help, and don't let anybody see you cry. From what I observe, the magic in life gets revealed when we move in the opposite direction, toward our vulnerability. And if cancer is anything at all, it is a doorway into the land of the vulnerable on so many levels and in so many dimensions. Still, it is our creative choice how we will deal with that vulnerability. We might deal with it kicking and screaming, resisting it every inch of the way, or we might meet it with more fascination, more curiosity than fear. Our choice. Either way, we're guaranteed profound growth because this particular relationship holds up a mighty powerful mirror to everything we've held to be true and dear and sacred. Victor, a young man, was very distressed to find out that the pain in his back was not the pulled muscle he had assumed, but was in fact a sarcoma that had metastasized. It was nearly impossible for him to hear what the doctor was saying, and it took a good hour to tease apart everything he had heard to really understand what was real and what his options were. And from the outset, he started off with, well, there's no way I'm taking chemotherapy. It's toxic, it's poison, because this news just didn't comport with how he saw himself. He saw himself as pristinely healthy. I'm a massage therapist. I'm a meditator. I'm a vegan. I'm physically fit. This can't be me. So, from that place of poison, he also said, maybe it's just my time to go. That toxic stuff will kill me, though he was a quite young man. In time, he moved from that position to a willingness to undergo chemotherapy. And now, rather than call chemotherapy toxic or poison, he calls it his golden infusion. It's been several years now. He's doing rather well. His chemo is stable. But it's been an incremental journey to move from that resistance and rigidity to a place of kind of being at choice. How am I going to view this? How am I going to ride this wave? Still, it's an incremental process. And like any learning curve, I find there's obstacles and there are opportunities. And both on this particular journey are formidable. From what I observe, the obstacles in coming to peace with powerlessness have everything to do with the theme of attachment. Attachment to belief systems, attachment to outcomes, even to our very identity. I've worked in many different settings as a chaplain over the years. I've worked in hospice, I've worked in palliative care, worked in liver transplants in the psychiatric hospital, and certainly many years in cancer. And in each setting in which I've worked, I find there's often a unique constellation of spiritual themes that sort of come up to be reviewed, to be dealt with. In liver transplants, for instance, many people need new livers because of past self-destructive behaviors, drug and alcohol abuse. So there can be a lot of shame and disgrace. Do I really deserve this second chance at life? You mean I have to pray that somebody dies so I can get their liver? With cancer patients, I find often one's whole identity might deconstruct right before their eyes. Everything I thought I was has kind of disappeared. I don't know who I am anymore. Richard had been a brilliant, highly regarded engineering professor. He now has a brain tumor. Michael, I used to be smart. That's who I was. I was the smart guy, but now I can't find the easiest word to finish a simple sentence. Does that mean that Richard doesn't exist anymore? Has he disappeared? Or is there something else essential there? I invite you to think about 4 or 5 things that make you who you are, that if anybody's going to know you at all, they're going to know these 4 or 5 things about you, that you're a talented artist, you're a gifted athlete, you're a clever accountant, you're a devoted parent or grandparent. Perhaps you're known for your beautiful physique and your great head of hair. That would be me. Imagine none of that is true anymore, or not in the same way. Who would you even be then? Is there an essential you who dwells beneath all of those labels with which we would identify, under all those hats we might wear? What's more, is he or she worthy of love? Is he or she capable of giving love? As painful as it may be to entertain those questions, they do reflect a most profound spiritual journey through loss, toward essence, if you will, maybe even toward that which is indestructible. And from what I've observed of those walking that path, what's on the other side of those questions is beyond words, even though nobody bought a ticket for this journey. And while, yes, this might be a side benefit of cancer, this spiritual journey, I find that it is often our attachment to an old, limited identity that can really trip us up. One of the oncologists asked me to go see Vicky, who was so distressed that the oncologist thought she might need a psychiatric evaluation. In any event, Michael, she's up on the unit now. She's sobbing her eyes out. Will you go see her? Vicky had been living with a particularly rare lymphoma for maybe 15 years or so, and in those 15 years had been on maybe a dozen drug protocols. Each one worked for a time, but then lost its effectiveness. Today was day 1 of yet another drug protocol, and Vicky was just cooked, wiped out. But to hear her tell it, Michael, actually, I'm really doing quite well. I'm so grateful. I'm so blessed, really. See, I've got this wonderful husband, and I've got these kids and grandkids, and they all love me. And I've got this wonderful church community and a deep Christian faith. And everybody tells me I'm so strong and upbeat and positive. And it was like the more she talked, the higher her voice got, the shallower her breath, as if the rope was getting tighter around her neck, because she just couldn't reconcile these all too human emotions of disappointment and regret with her attachment to her identity as Little Miss Sunshine. And look at all these other people around the clinic, Michael. So many others have it so much worse. Why am I such a crybaby? Now she's just heaped on this other helping of self-judgment to add to her suffering using the "it could be worse" strategy. It's a strategy that nearly all of us use at some point or another to somehow slap us awake into an attitude of gratitude, if you will. But on the cancer journey, I find often we use it as a weapon to beat ourselves up for not being positive enough, hopeful enough, prayerful enough. We're way too busy judging the suffering sweepstakes, figuring out where we fit in the lineup. It was as if Vicky were trying to compose a symphony called Vicky, but had decided that only these 4 or 5 notes would be acceptable to be used. Only these sweet notes of forgiveness and compassion and gratitude and love and joy. There was no room for any deep, dark notes of despair, frustration, anger, resentment. The thing is, it takes all 88 keys on a piano to write a full-bodied symphony. All those sweet high notes, all those deep, dark notes, and everything in between. A few dark notes in the symphony of Vicky does not make her less of who she is. It makes her more. It's been several years now. Her disease is stable. She's doing well. She remains her essential, sunshiny self, but with a little more grace and allowance to be all of who she is, a 3-dimensional human being with a full range of human experience. Yeah, sometimes those waves can hold us underwater, carry us out to sea, as if we're caught in an undertow or a riptide. I grew up in Long Beach, California. I remember every spring the lifeguards would come and offer us a water safety assembly, and they would tell us what to do if we found ourselves caught in a riptide. Don't swim against it. You will drown. Let it carry you out. And when you can, swim out of the riptide, parallel to the shore. Get your bearings, rest up, and when you can, swim back. It's a wonderful metaphor. I find that struggling only guarantees more struggle. It's like those, we used to call them Chinese finger puzzles, little bamboo tubes. We get them at carnivals as little kids. You'd stick your fingers in the end of the tube and, Mom, I can't get my fingers out, I'm stuck. And then when you breathe and you relax, the fingers slide out. We might be overcome with feelings of, I shouldn't be this negative. I've got to be more positive. God has more for me to do. It's a sin to despair. All of these feelings, maybe it's best when they overcome us to just let them take us out to sea for a bit. And when we can, swim out of them and back to shore. Sometimes it's not an attachment to an old, limited version of our identification that can trip us up, but we might inadvertently become attached to a new identity as a cancer patient. I can't tell you how many times I meet a patient, and when I ask them to tell me about their life before diagnosis, I swear the whole shape of their face changes when they start talking about their kids or their grandkids or their dog. Oh, you won't believe the cute thing he did this morning, Michael. Let me show you a picture. Look at that. Isn't that the cutest thing you ever saw? It's as if they forgot for that moment that they are more than this one who sits in an infusion chair all day, hooked up to an IV stand, that they're more than this one who's wrestling with insurance companies on the telephone. Kyle presented the most interesting twist on this over-identification with myself as a cancer patient. Kyle was one of the lucky ones. He was given the all clear by his doctor, cured of Hodgkin's lymphoma. Go live your life, be well. And for a time, he did just that. He thrived. His church community asked him to give inspirational talks. He was doing just fine. Until a little while later, the reality of everything he had gone through started to seep in, and he was digesting it. And he got paralyzed with fear and grief, terrified of a recurrence, grieving what had been lost around the way. Look at me, Michael. I'm one of the lucky ones. I'm the guy who beat the odds. I'm the one they asked for inspiration, and now look at me. It was as if he had become over identified with himself as cancer patient as superhero, sort of the latter day Lance Armstrong, if you will, before his fall from grace. We looked at what it might mean to take off that mask of bravado and to admit that, you know what, I beat cancer and it still kicked my ass. It still kicked me to the curb. What kind of grace would that offer to others, to himself, to be a human being? Sometimes it's not just an attachment to an old identity that trips us up in our pathway to coming to peace with powerlessness. We can be overly attached to a belief or belief system. One belief that I think many of us carry that we might be reluctant to admit is that life, the earth, the universe is a just and fair place. Oh, the pain of giving that one up, or at least admitting maybe it is just and fair. I'm just not equipped to see how true that is. Heidi, 32 years old, newly diagnosed with ovarian cancer, rough. She called the center, desperate for someone to talk to help her make sense of all of this. She used that expression several times. She was deeply rooted in a Protestant faith tradition. She'd found some inspiration recently in some Buddhist reading she had done. But boy, was she struggling. Michael, I don't understand why this is happening. I'm a good person. I've never knowingly hurt anyone. I tell the truth. I'm always the first to show up and help. It's just the way I was raised. And I've been praying so hard, and God won't answer. I'm so angry. Why? Wow, she raises so many theological themes and questions there, but front and center is this idea that it's not right, it's not fair, it's not just. Over my years of study, I've come upon this hypothesis that for any genuine transformation to take place, it must be preceded by a betrayal and a death. Betrayal, death, transformation. We might look to the Jesus story as an example. Jesus had to be betrayed, had to die for the whole centerpiece of Christian theology to take place: resurrection, transformation. This pattern exists in many of the world's great myths and theologies. Might be interesting to look back at your own life at moments of profound growth and shift and change. Was it preceded by something that could be seen as a betrayal and a death? Now, it may not mean a physical death, but maybe the death of a belief, the death of a relationship, maybe the death of a career trajectory. With Heidi, we looked at what her statements really revealed about her beliefs, and she had to admit that when it came right down to it, I guess I thought, if I'm a good person, I do the right thing, I won't get sick, and I'll never die. In a way, it's not so different, really, than believing in Santa Claus. If I'm a good little girl, eat my vegetables, don't sass back, I'll get a shiny red bicycle for Christmas. In a way, she had to grieve the death of Santa at 32. It's an interesting question for all of us. Can we be open enough and porous enough to allow in a new truth, a new understanding of truth, when the old one just isn't big enough to contain this particular reality? Angela came to this same spiritual crossroads, but from a very different path. She came from a path of New Age thought, a belief in karma. It's another way of saying it's a just universe out there. What goes around comes around. A big belief in meditation as a practice. Michael, when I was first diagnosed, I was meditating 5, 6, 7 times a day religiously. And then when my scans revealed that my cancer had not been stopped, but had in fact spread, I felt so betrayed. And I realized I hadn't been meditating for the right reason at all, not for the peace it could give me in that moment. I was meditating because I thought it might cure me. Both Heidi and Angela were attached to a very specific outcome, namely cure. It was the only thing that would do. It would have to be the most human of all urges. Who doesn't want to be cured of cancer? But what if it's simply not in the cards? What if the most either could hope for would simply be more time living with chronic cancer? Or what if, God forbid, this disease does mean the imminent end of my physical body? Am I not entitled to an experience of peace, of healing that may not include cure? Is that even possible? Ben, a lovely older gentleman, had end-stage liver cancer, not much time left, and he knew it. To top it off, his wife had stage 4 breast cancer. When I introduced myself to him, he invited me to come in and sit down as if it were cocktail time. Had this very easy demeanor. What's going on, Ben? Well, Michael, it's the best time of my life. I guess that makes me sound crazy, huh? Not at all, I said. Tell me more. It's like for the first time in my life, I understand my role in life, my place in it, and I feel comfortable in my own skin. And it's enough already. Yeah, I'd like to see Yellowstone one more time, but you know what? It's enough. Personally, I don't know that there's much more to aspire to than that sense of enoughness. This life is enough. This day is enough. This moment is enough. This breath is enough. It's not at all unusual for me to hear folks say that in some way they see their cancer as a kind of blessing. For some, that might come as a quiet revelation or discovery. For some, it might seem heretical. For some, it might seem absolutely liberating. Jill was a great gal. I liked her a lot. Very smart, successful, but tough, 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 tough. She had grown up in a family that for generations had revered self-reliance and independence. You do not ask for help. You don't let anybody see you cry. Her attachment to this value system was so firm, so rigid, that when she was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, she actually considered not getting treated. Maybe it's just my time to go, though she was a quite young woman. But if I get treated, Michael, nobody's going to know. I can't have anybody feeling sorry for me, wanting to help, and all of that. Now she's moved to a whole other place where she sees this cancer as something that has awakened her out of this stubbornness as she has started to reach out for help from others and to share her story, particularly with her boss. They had always had a difficult, kind of challenging, contentious relationship. But when she decided to tell him about her diagnosis and that she would need to pull back a little bit, he told her about his wife's diagnosis. And they'd become quite a support system for each other, quite a wonderful relationship. So much so that she had this awakening in the middle of our discussion. Michael, I guess I'd have to say, I'm glad I got cancer. She couldn't believe she'd said that. She said, I've never said that. I've never even thought it. And then she said it again. Yeah, I guess I'd have to say, I'm glad I got cancer. Talk about betrayal, death, and transformation. Jill, like so many patients, like all of us really, take pride in our independence and our self-reliance. And so many cancer patients struggle with the help and the need that cancer seems to demand. Needing help is one thing, accepting it is another. And yet I've heard countless times as folks move through that doorway of vulnerability and ask for that kind of help, they talk about miracles that happen in their lives. This outpouring of love and support from often the unlikeliest of sources. It's not my best friend who I thought would be there no matter what. It's the woman down the street who showed up with a casserole and offered to pick up my kids from school. The thing is, it takes a lot of strength to be vulnerable. Louise was a powerhouse of a gal, the kind of go-to person if you want to get something done. She was a museum director. And she told me when she had been diagnosed with lung cancer and had to come out at work as someone with this diagnosis because she would need to pull back, the craziest thing happened, Michael. People started coming to me with their problems. And these are problems that I have to say pale in comparison to cancer. But the thing is, it was a gift to me. Cancer had robbed me of a lot, but here it had given me this opportunity to be of service, to connect with people in a way that I had never been allowed to before. I think people maybe were intimidated by me. I'd call that a kind of magic. Sometimes in our pursuit of peace with powerlessness, it's not just an attachment to an outmoded ID or to a belief system, but we might become overly attached to the meaning itself, holding it too tight, not allowing it to shift, to change, to evolve, or maybe even disappear altogether. Or we might confuse our experience with its meaning, or even an object with its meaning. Lourdes was razor thin, wheelchair bound, in her 70s, rectal cancer, tenderly cared for by her son Enrique, but on this particular day in the infusion clinic, she was very distressed and tearful. She told me the story of how decades earlier, when she left her native Puerto Rico, that her mother had given her a few precious pieces of jewelry to remember her by. Now, Lourdes was also a bit of a pack rat. She kept all of her belongings in bags and baggies, strewn on the floor surrounding the recliner where she spent most of her waking hours. Earlier that week, in an attempt to tidy up, Enrique inadvertently threw out the baggie with the jewelry in it. Loris was beside herself with grief and anger. Michael, I haven't been able to sleep. I haven't been able to eat. The nurse just told me I lost 5 pounds. If you'd seen her, you'd see she didn't have 5 pounds to lose. And I'm so angry at Enrique. Why is he such a control freak? How could he be so careless? I invited Lourdes to gently dip into the spiritual waters of forgiveness, which was not a good call on my part, I must admit. So then I invited a reflection on what was the real gift her mother gave her. Was it really a few pieces of jewelry, or was it her undying love and affection, as symbolized by the jewelry? And that's a gift that can't be lost, misplaced, or thrown away. In a similar way, it seemed Lourdes had the gift of precious little time left on the planet. Would she spend the gift of that time enjoying the love of her son Enrique, or would she spend it stewing in her own anger and grief? She just might. That would be her choice. I sometimes think that the very last power we have is the power to assign meaning to our stories. And who has the standing to assign meaning to our own stories, to own them, if you will? Do we own them, or do we sometimes give that power away to the opinion and interpretation of others? I hear almost universally from patients stories about these folks in their lives who have all of their ideas of how to fix them up. I read about this clinic in Germany. You got to try it. How about this book? You got to read this book. You got to say this prayer. You got to see my acupuncturist. There's a place in Mexico. Or you got to eat more kale. I think all of us have those people in our lives who are all too happy at any given moment to tell us exactly what sense we should make of our lives, what we should do about it. And in so doing, they deny us the dignity of our own hard-won choices. And there's a part of us that might even crave their affirmation and approval. What would it look like if we could walk beside each other with full support? However you have chosen your journey so far, I'm here. I'm in your corner. Every cancer patient has had to struggle with which institution am I going to trust, which doctor am I going to trust, which treatment plan am I going to trust. Those are hard-won decisions. Is it supportive? Is it remotely loving to say, maybe you didn't do it right, you got to try it my way? There's that powerlessness again coming in to confront our own hard-won choices. What would it look like to walk beside another with authentic compassion? My dad died on December 31st, 2004. There aren't too many relationships that we would consider to have more intrinsic meaning than that between a father and a son, a mother and daughter. It's ancient, it's primal, it's organic. But we don't have to look too far to see how untrue that is. We had an uneasy relationship at best. And though he's been dead for, 17 years, I find the meaning of that relationship continues to change and evolve. 7 years before he died, my sister Terry and I interviewed him rather exhaustively on videotape about his life. Even so, it's just a snapshot. It's not the whole picture. As I mentioned earlier, he flew B-17s over Germany during World War II. He was telling us a story about a ritual he had with his crew before they would take off for every mission to check out the intercom system. My dad would begin by singing in his intercom, in his headpiece, "I've flown around the world in a plane." Bombardier comes on, "I've settled revolutions in Spain." The tail gunner comes on, "The North Pole I have charted, but I can't get started with you." It was a popular song of the day. I found that story to be so sweet, so small, so specific, and it brought the most youthful and human dimension to a man and to an experience I found completely incomprehensible. Many years after the war, my dad called his co-pilot, Milton Tarr, out of the clear blue. And when Milton answered, my dad just sang, "I float around the world in a plane." Milton just barked, "Who the hell is this?" "It's me, Albert." "Milton, remember how we used to do that before we took off on a mission?" Milton had no recollection of that whatsoever, which made my dad sigh in disappointment. Us too. And I've spent some time wondering why that story touches me so much. And the truth is, I don't know. I don't think my dad was ever really at ease in his role as a father, certainly not one with two gay kids. And the times when we could ever meet, be on the same page about anything, though it was far more likely we would meet on his page than he on ours, well, those times are precious and they have meaning for me, and I cherish them. And what I take from my dad's story with Milton and from all of these stories really is that our journey, the way we ride that wave, is our own. And the meaning we make of it is our own. Can we hold it and caress it and allow it to change and change us and maybe even disappear altogether? And if somebody else gets it and can share it with us, even for a moment, well, then that's gravy, isn't it? But we always have that meaning to ourselves. May we all ride our own waves with grace, with curiosity, with patience, with love, keeping our eyes and hearts open for blessings we don't even know we're looking for. They are ours. Thank you.